Hey, hold on a second. I just want to run this again. The link between electronic music and then the world of automation technology and the factory automation, because there's a lot that we have in common between these two worlds. You know, we're here in Freiburg in Switzerland at the playroom for the Swiss Museum of Electronic Music, otherwise known as SMEM.
Bus, voiture, train, un peu un mélange.
Voilà. And the real magic. Welcome to the Schulager. No worries. So here we are at the Aladdin's Cave of Synthesizers, right? The biggest collection of electronic music equipment in the world.
And in that case, l'écran il sert à quelque chose ou
oui, c'est un ordinateur. En fait, ça c'est un ordinateur. Donc c'est un des premiers instruments de musique basés sur un vrai ordinateur. Mais tout était custom. C'était une entreprise australienne, Fairlight, Australian company, et ils ont développé en fait tout un système de traitement de signal numérique avec un ordinateur qu'ils ont conçu eux-mêmes avec leur propre OS. Pour pouvoir piloter en fait les cartes de son numériques. So Mr. Mark Koto is discovering what is a theremin. Et je t'explique un truc, parce que Marc, c'est quand même impressionnant. Alors, qu'est-ce que Modicon et New England Digital, donc le fabricant de synclaviers, a eu en commun?
Il y a un microcontrôleur?
Ben, c'est pas que de ça, en fait, pas microcontrôleur, microprocesseur. En fait, c'était cette marque-là, Digital. Ok, tu vois le marque Digital? Tu sais que c'est un VT100? Bah, VT100, c'est un terminal. Et pourquoi en fait c'est important? C'est parce que Modicon et New England Digital, bah, c'était dans le même région aux États-Unis. Et donc il y a beaucoup de points en commun. Donc le VT100, ça permet d'avoir une console. Aujourd'hui, on utilise du logiciel lourd, genre TIA Portal, EcoStructure, pour programmer en fait les automates.
Oui, avant c'était des consoles.
Ben, avant c'était une console avec que la texte en fait, un clavier, un petit monitor.
Un truc physique qui marchait que sur cette console.
Exactement. Et donc là, plutôt dans les systèmes SCADA de l'époque, des années 70, donc je parle de en fait la partie SCADA, pas la partie automation. Donc SCADA, le Master Station, SCADA Master Station.
Qui pilote tout un réseau.
Oui, qui pilote, qui fait la synoptique, la supervision. Bah, alors, pour avoir accès au ordinateur, donc les parties plus bas de niveau, pour héberger les applications métiers de SCADA supervision, bah, c'était par ce genre de console, le VT100. Very interesting.
I'm learning so much stuff here.
Cool. But part of the reason for this visit is simply to talk about, the link between electronic music and synthesizers, particularly certain digital or hybrid analog and digital synthesizers, and then the world of automation technology and the factory automation, because there's a lot that we have in common between these two worlds.
Yeah. Et t'as vu, c'est même avec...
Ouf, et puis tu peux faire partir ça en feedback aussi. Il y a énormément de modèles, mais il y en a qui sont beaucoup moins connus que d'autres. Le Space Echo, c'est un peu le plus connu. Voilà, moi c'est aussi, on a un monstre ici. Ça c'est vraiment un...
Oh fuck yeah! Oh man! Apex Twin!
Il y a plusieurs folies.
Des années 30, fin années 30.
C'est ça qui est marqué la Nova Chord?
Ouais.
Ils ont mis la...
The Nova Chord, almost 100 years old.
Attends, vous avez mis...
There are only 5 which are in working condition.
Ouais, alors là, il y a l'oscilloscope qui est directement branché dessus. Et ça, c'est un circuit qui est tout à l'ample. Donc, on a un vieux électronicien qui a 75 piges qui bien à s'occuper de ça parce que c'est des circuits vraiment
particulier.
à l'ancienne, ouais.
Et c'est des choses qui... Waouh, c'est fou ça.
Et alors là, on va entendre le... Donc le starter, là, c'est un truc, c'est pour lancer le vibrato. Sur les 12 premières notes, en fait, t'as un oscillateur par note.
Ok.
Il me semble que c'est une sine.
Ok.
Et qu'ensuite c'est divisé, et puis voilà, et puis en fait, beaucoup de composants à lampe, genre il y a plus d'une centaine de lampes dedans. Enfin, un peu moins d'une centaine, autant pour moi. On les voit qui s'allument gentiment. Et puis alors sur ces lampes-là, il me semble qu'il y en a, je crois, tout juste moins de 100. Et sur toutes celles-là, il y en a quasiment 85 qui sont d'origine, 80-85 qui sont d'origine, qui sont toujours les mêmes. Et puis, je vais faire une petite démo, et puis après je vais vous laisser un peu jouer.
Je vais voir les lampes en même temps.
Je vais juste laisser un peu le son sur la sortie. Ah ouais, c'est fort. Bon, ça va juste saturer, ça va être joli, mais...
Ouais.
Ce qui est fou, c'est qu'on a quand même... Bon, alors là, bien sûr, pédale de volume. Pédale de sustain. C'est pas la bonne. Et on a une enveloppe. Donc, on peut régler l'attaque. Là, t'as vu le... C'est vrai, c'est vrai que je sais pas si tu lui avais expliqué un peu le principe d'une enveloppe.
Pas encore. En fait, on n'a pas eu le. Ouais.
Mais j'ai vu à l'entrée, il y a des petites box, on pourra voir
exactement. En gros, l'enveloppe, pour faire simple, c'est une décomposition temporelle du son, avec l'attaque qui va être le temps que le son met à atteindre son point maximum. Attaque decay, le temps que le son met à redescendre à son volume moyen. On va parler de volume au début. Sustain, le temps qui reste à son volume moyen. Et release, le temps que le son met à fade off, tu vois. Mais ça, c'est pas forcément que pour le volume, ça peut aussi être affecté à un filtre par exemple, ou à tout un tas d'autres paramètres. Là, en l'occurrence, c'est le volume, et puis sur un synthé de cette époque, c'est assez cool, je trouve, d'avoir une enveloppe pour faire en plus avec la pédale.
Et si tu joues ici, est-ce qu'on voit les lampes s'allumer?
Les lampes déjà tu peux les voir allumées en dessous, mais après les lampes une fois qu'elles sont allumées...
Ah oui, on en voit là.
Là tu vois, et celles qui sont là aussi.
Attends, vas-y, joue.
Ils sont allumées.
Et là ici elles sont allumées aussi, tu vois. Alors ça, voilà, ça c'est une pédale de volume, donc tu peux vraiment amener
on
le
peut
son.
faire comme ça.
Voilà, il y a quand même une possibilité, tu vois. Là il y a une note qui reste, alors je sais pas pourquoi, mais...
Là-bas, c'est le gros volume. Alors, du coup, ok. Et du coup, tu peux faire... Ça, c'est pas résumé.
Là tout ça, ça va un peu... Tu vois, ça va ramener des graves, c'est presque comme un filtre, tu vois. En gros, là, ça va te permettre de ramener plus de fréquences à différentes parties du spectre. Là, il y a une petite tone, tu vois. Tu vois, le son est beaucoup plus grave.
Wow, c'est fou ça.
Quelle heure?
Ça commence vers 19h, je pense. Ouais, ça fait tard. Ça fait un peu tard. Bonne fête d'ailleurs. C'est un pro à la synthèse, hein. Pour les lire, hein. Ça c'est le DCF qui est le fameux passive de certaines fréquences. Voilà, j'ai les fréquences aiguës.
The sound of Gary Newman and the Chihuahua Army. Everyone needs a mini Moog. We just spent an incredible day visiting the Showlager, which is the big underground bunker containing one of the world's largest, probably the world's largest collection of electronic music instruments. And some really rare pieces there, as well as a bunch of hardware that is quite legendary in terms of how it has an impact on music production. But here's the crazy thing, Mark, is we can see with the evolution of electronic music and synthesizers and various technology that's used that is more and more computer controlled, a strong parallel with how industrial automation has evolved over more or less the same time period.
One of the funny thing is, for automation engineering, usually we tend to refer to the controllers with their reference number, and that's almost the same with electronic music. So you have the synthesizers that have a brand, a number, etc. So it's funny. I think one of the first similarities is for sure the fact that there is some analog signals and some controlling inside. So you can do some sequencing the same way that you will do your sequencing in a cyclic events in a PLC, in the controller for industrial machines. So lots of similarities, and something interesting as well for those who also take interest into the history of manufacturing machines. There is the different generations of devices. So here for music is the same, you will have several generations that you can see here on the video, but of course there are much more down there. I invite you to see the website of this SMEM, so Museum of Electronic Music, because there are several generations and you can see how the electronic has impacted many parallel sectors, the music industry, manufacturing machines. It could be the same for CNC machines, even aeronautics. So eventually, you can also feel like what it is to be like an electronic geek.
Exactly.
That's the word. Because then you can apply your skills and your knowledge in several industries and still be the same person, and that's what I also enjoy with your experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's quite remarkable is that, both with industrial automation and process control and the way in which we implement, the manufacturing automation, where you've got machines and you have things that are either measuring or sensing, and you have things which are actuating or driving, so you have inputs and outputs. Now, it's very similar with music, because with music, obviously we're producing sound, which us human beings listen to, right? So we're experiencing this physically, okay? And obviously on the inputs we're going to be triggering notes, we're going to be changing parameters, etc. And these two things really are essentially the same. It's just that the way that they're applied achieve different outcomes, okay? But for me, what was probably quite remarkable was seeing a 1930s vintage Hammond Nova chord. Okay, now what's really amazing at SMEM is that this instrument, there are only 5 working versions of this instrument in the world. And it's such a treat to actually hear it and play it in real life. Now, this is an instrument which uses really vintage electronics using vacuum tubes, okay? And if we go back far enough and we look at industrial automation before the age of the programmable logic controller, right? We will see vacuum tubes being used in industry in order to switch loads, because that was the only way to have a control signal to switch or modulate an output. I think this is quite incredible.
It was fascinating to test that instrument, and I even took the time to play, even though I'm not a big musician, but you can feel where technology, plays a role in the design of some impressive instruments, be it for music or for industry, and eventually you see also the art behind technology. At some point, for those of you who are doing design or engineering, you all know that when you finish a work, sometimes you feel like you have just produced a piece of art. And I think it's the same with electronics. It's like it's beyond the simple fact of soldering some resistors or making some sequencing in the machine. It helps also feeling something that you bring something to the world that is beyond even your expertise, your domain, but even beyond the borders. We got the opportunity to see some devices that have some links with the former Soviet Union, and some devices that are from Japan, from the US, some which were done in Australia. So you feel also how the technology can be cross-border. It's a way to make people meet and enjoy. Beyond all the possible issues that could happen.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, we can also see where there are some points of intersection between, as I say, computing, industrial automation and controls, and also music technology, where certain generations of hardware, so whether it comes to a synthesizer or a programmable logic controller or a mini computer, right, you can see that there are common building blocks that have been used and reused across these three different sectors of activity. And a lot of this comes back to computer control, right? Using microprocessors to, again, manage inputs, switch outputs, to obviously modulate signals. And this has probably been the biggest shift, that started around the 1970s, was moving towards microprocessors. So a lot of the legacy technology or the existing installations that we have out there in factories, even in recording studios today, right? You're going to find equipment that is based on a very classic microprocessor architecture. And of course, that's now shifted, because if we look at where we are in 2025, where things are virtualized and are emulated, okay, we're taking a lot of this old technique and we're now applying it into a new, much more powerful processing environment. And so with all the industrial automation stuff that we have today, if you think about using virtual machines or using more advanced software, a lot of that actually is set up to emulate or to provide a kind of a new host for like some old things.
Of course, and it's important to understand how these old things were done, were produced or were designed, because when you have to convert it into a modern version, even if it's virtualized, there is still some basic understanding that is important. I take the example, for instance, of the amplifier. It used to be some physical device. Now we have this same version, but in the digital version. And in the manufacturing, it's the same. It's like we shouldn't forget, why things were done in the past. Because first, there are still some machines from the past that are still in production. You need to deal with this obsolescence. But the second reason is also it helps you understand as an engineer from the modern days why we are doing things. And that's why we love going to museums. And I think that's one passion we share together, is because it reminds you that there is, this history of techniques that is important. If you want to really master your skill or your domain expertise, you need to understand where we are coming from.
I agree. I'll add to that because there's this other angle to it which I think is important. So also a lot of these old vintage, machines are still useful, and they actually bring character because they have their own character to it. If we look at how old microprocessor architecture, synthesizers, or industrial automation equipment, they do have character to them. And they also reflect, because there's an interesting sort of feedback loop there when you are implementing a machine and you were doing that in the 1970s or the 1980s, and you use certain technology, right, for automation, and that gives character to the machine. But think about some of the manufacturing processes or industrial processes that you're familiar with in your domain. Some of those processes have been around for 150, 200 years, right? If you think about textile industry, the whole thing of weaving textile, chemicals, petrochemicals, there's tons of examples, right? Pulp and paper, biotech, etc. All of those things are built on top of a very kind of old foundation. And sometimes the character of the, let's say the result, right, the actual product, right, is based on a very old type of machine or a very old way of implementing. So being familiar with all this old stuff and practicing it and coming into not just visiting a museum because you get to see cool stuff, but come to a playroom like here where you can actually get hands-on.
Test it, yeah.
You can play, learn, record, and do useful stuff with it. So like sitting just behind us is a vintage mini Moog, right? So this is the Moog synthesizer, and that was one of the very legendary examples of 1970s mono synths that's used on all sorts of records that your parents, even your grandparents will be familiar with, and that is just testament to that's there, it's vintage, it's still working, and it brings character. So if you're recording music, you're going to want to use some of this vintage gear in order to bring character to your production.
Yeah, I think the key word here is really character, and I like it, but the way you say it, Matthew, because it's important if you want to last in our manufacturing world to understand who are the person, what are they doing, what do they feel, right? And the best way to feel it is to experience via some demo environment like this. I really wish there are more practical, environment like that. It's also a way to build some legacy. You mean how many engineers or designers have done years of work implementing innovation, and that innovation was lost just because no one thought about making it available to the public or making it available in a book or in the documentation. I think the way we deal with legacy and vintage stuff, it also tells the way we see our industry. Do we want this industry to last long? And if so, then we need also to record that history, because it will serve definitely to build that character in the future.
Very, very, very true. And I would sort of like to, think a bit about how, seeing a place like the Playroom here at the Swiss Museum for Electronic Music, how we could eventually build a similar thing with industrial automation and OT gear, right? So, if you're working in a manufacturer and you have legacy controls, SCADA, automation gear, before you throw it out, right?
Call us.
Call us.
It would be great to assemble everything. We have the skills to make it live again, and maybe do some demo, at least for passionate engineers, but also for the next generation, so that they understand why we are doing this way, and it becomes then something live. Our guy, he said something that I really enjoyed. Is there is no sense for a device to be there in a, in a room if it's no longer used. I mean, there is no point for it. It needs to serve a role, and the same way in music instrument needs to serve for music, it's the same for manufacturing. a device or a PLC or a controller needs to serve for its original purpose, which is to drive some machinery, to drive some mechanism. So if you have some ancient devices, let us know.
Yeah, and I think that this might actually highlight a key difference, because we've been talking about similarities, but there's a key difference between industrial automation and electronic music technology. So when it comes to synthesizers and various other electronic music instruments, all right, remember we're producing sound, okay? So basically these devices are quite easy because you can plug in a pair of headphones, put in speakers, run it through a mixing disc and listen to it. Okay, but industrial automation, PLCs in particular, they actually need to be connected to real inputs and outputs on machines. So for me, it's not enough just simply preserving the automation equipment. Like you also need to have some way of preserving machinery as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of stuff to me, but my feeling after this day of visit is legacy is important, you know. Whatever the domain, whatever your passion, it needs to be built on a baseline, and that baseline is the only way you can have a common language between you and your peers. So really important, like there is even the story of a manufacturing site not far from here in Romont, La Verrerie de Romont, who was doing like glass, right? Now the site has closed, I think in the beginning 2000, but the director of this site, and that guy now works in the luxury industry, but before leaving that site, he put a lot of effort building an association just to preserve the history of that site. That means the design, even the drawings of all the machines, like the accountants' files, everything is like stored, and I think the storage is like 40 meters long, just to tell you like how important it was for them to keep it, and that makes the manufacturing site last even if now it's closed. You know, some children of the people can come back and see what was done at this place. So legacy is important.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway, so Matthew Smith here, Mark Kokoto there, and thanks for watching.
Cheers.